The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
Faster Mai, good afternoon. Welcome to Mannin Line on Manx Radio for the next hour. We'll be discussing getting opinion and views on Dr. Allinson's private members bill for assisted dying on the Isle of Man. There will be more than 3,300 responses to Dr. Allinson's private members bill. There was a public consultation. In June of last year, he was granted leave to introduce a private members bill calling for people to be able to have the right to choose. Dr. Allinson said he's got a wide range of views and evidence in support for and against, and not just from people on the Isle of Man. Today we're talking to Trevor Moore and Baroness Finlay just about opinion on either side of this debate, and let's just hope by the time we get to 1 o'clock we've got some light on the subject. First of all, Baroness Finlay is with us. Faster Mike, good afternoon.
Hello, thank you.
Okay, now you're a professor in palliative medicine, obviously a crossbench peer in the UK House of Lords.
Yes.
In a nutshell, what's your opinion and stance on this subject?
Well, I've looked after thousands of dying patients, and over the years I've become more and more convinced, as I've also looked at the evidence of what's happened around the world, that this is a really dangerous route to go down. And that actually we need to be providing real choices in care, looking after people well, relieving distress. We do not need to give them lethal drugs to kill them.
Okay, and Trevor Moore, your particular website is called, what is it, Trevor?
My Death, My Decision. We're campaigning for a law for assisted dying that would allow terminally ill people without any particular life expectancy criterion. Commonly, other jurisdictions use 6 months, but we don't think that's appropriate. But we also think that people who are suffering unbearably from incurable conditions should also have the right to choose an assisted death. I say choose, that's the important word here.
What led you to this position, Trevor?
A combination of factors. Compassion. I'm actually a funeral celebrant, and I get to meet people who are near the end of their lives, but also families who are dealing with the aftermath of what they often describe as bad deaths. But also, some of your listeners may remember the case of Tony Nicklinson back in 2012, when a man with locked-in syndrome who could only communicate by using his eyes to look at letters which his wife could then interpret. He wasn't terminally ill, but by any stretch he was incurably suffering, and so I feel that a law should extend to people like Tony and the many litigants there have been in the UK, over in England and Wales, like Paul Lamb, Noel Conway, etc.
And Laura Finlay, what's your response to that particular situation?
Well, my response to that is that because there's been experience of bad care, the answer isn't to change the law so doctors can give patients lethal drugs to kill them. The answer is to do more to improve the care that people have, better support. And I think it's important to remember that you cannot determine what is going to happen in the future. So the fact that somebody is suffering now is a real trigger to do something about their suffering and help them find a quality of life and improve their lives, rather than reinforce their despair and process them to lethal drugs. And I know that in the Isle of Man you have a very good hospice service and you have a good supportive community, and I would really urge you to build on that and not go down the route of a distraction of saying, right, now we'll have doctors give patients lethal drugs. And the way that proposed law is drafted is also very worrying.
Okay, you gave a presentation, I understand, to some of our elected representatives and parliamentarians yesterday. Can I ask you what you said to them?
Oh, well, I could give you the whole presentation. Basically, I was trying to point out to them the evidence that there is from around the world. So if say we look at public opinion, that's the first thing. There was a survey done, this wasn't on the Isle of Man, it was England and Wales, asking people what they understood that assisted dying meant. Only 43% of them realised it was giving lethal drugs. 42% thought that it was the right to choose to stop futile treatment or to not have treatment imposed on you. Well, that's already completely legal. It is an assault in law to treat someone against their will without their consent. The cases that have just been cited now, in fact, those people certainly could, because I think they're deceased, could decline any clinical intervention, and if they do, they must be looked after and supported as they die of their underlying condition. That's already the law, and what the survey showed was 10% of people thought that it was hospice care. So there's a huge misunderstanding amongst the public as to just what this is. Yes, there's been publicity around a few high-profile cases, but let's remember, on the Isle of Man, you have, I think it's about 500 deaths a year. Certainly, England and Wales, it's about 500,000 deaths a year. These are one or two high-profile stories with a great deal of publicity around them. That is not the reason to change the law.
OK, we're with Baroness Finlay, Laura Finlay, and Trevor Moore talking about the proposed assisted dying legislation on the Isle of Man. And opinion, by all means, get in touch, text, email, call and WhatsApp. And first on the line is Julian. Hi, Julian. You're live with Trevor Moore and Baroness Finlay.
Hi, Andy, and good afternoon, Baroness Finlay and Trevor.
Hello. Hi.
Hello. I've got a couple of questions for Trevor, but Baroness Finlay is welcome to comment as well. First one is, the European Institute of Bioethics published a report on the 2020 document titled Euthanasia in Belgium, Analysis of the 2020 Commission Report. The data for the 2020 period indicated 57 people in Belgium were euthanized due to psychiatric disorders. 17 had depression or bipolar, 26 had personality or behavioral disorders, 4 had neuroses, 7 schizophrenia, and 3 had autism. What is Trevor's position on euthanizing people with depression, autism, schizophrenia, and in Canada's new Bill C7, the disabled?
Trevor?
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, there's no organisation campaigning in the UK or on the Isle of Man to allow assisted dying for people with mental illness. In many jurisdictions, it's expressly excluded. It wouldn't come within the ambit of Dr. Allinson's bill. So Belgium and all these other countries, there are now 28 jurisdictions around the world. We can learn lessons from them, some good and some not so good. But if that's happening in Belgium, that's a matter for the the government and people of Belgium, but it's not being proposed, as I understand it, in the Isle of Man.
Baroness Finlay?
Well, I think that actually this illustrates very clearly what happens. You change the law for one group of patients who you think you're putting a clear definition around, but actually those boundaries are just a line in the sand, and very quickly the call goes out, but this is inequality. How can you judge that the suffering of somebody with profound depression, perhaps somebody who's been abused previously, a youngster with anorexia, really severe anorexia, who's got a lot of disturbed, worrying factors, they can say, well, you're saying my suffering isn't warranted to give lethal drugs when they feel suicidal, but you'll give them to somebody else with a physical diagnosis. And of course, the law then changes and is expanded. We've seen that happen in Canada, as has just been cited. That happens in Belgium. I have just published a study of the data from the Netherlands, and we found 39 people with learning difficulties and or autism as that being the prime factor that they had been given lethal drugs. Now, I would say, and I think the Isle of Man is a good example of it, that society adapts to support people with learning difficulties to help them reach their full potential. Not say, well, you haven't adapted to society and therefore we'll give you lethal drugs when you're distressed. There are huge social implications. Talking about it as for terminally ill patients, and I'm interested that Trevor doesn't actually want to try and define those, is a way of getting a wedge in the door, a foot in the door, and then they know perfectly well there'll be cases taken, and the courts on equality and human rights will be saying, as has happened in these other countries, will expand.
Julian?
Yeah, and also getting informed consent from somebody with autism or psychiatric disorders is probably questionable as well. My second question for Trevor is, the UK House of Lords has recently stopped a proposed assisted dying bill from proceeding. For an assisted dying bill to pass here, would Section 2 of the Isle of Man Criminal Law Act, which forbids aiding, abetting or counselling a suicide under penalty of up to 14 years imprisonment, have to be altered or removed completely?
Trevor?
Sorry, could I just come back on the reference to Belgium and what Baroness Finlay was saying about laws expanding?
Okay.
Oregon has had their law since 1997. They've made some changes to it, one of which is about residency, and one is a cooling off period which can be waived if someone is expected to die within a matter of days. They have not extended it to mental illness, and to keep referring to psychiatric patients in Belgium is a bit of a distraction from the bill that is going to be before Tynwald. But on the criminal side of things, on my reading of the bill, there's express provision for that to qualify the relevant provisions, so that someone providing an assisted death under this bill would not obviously be committing a criminal offence.
Okay. A final word, Julian?
Yeah, Trevor, how would you stop future secondary legislation removing the safeguards in the primary legislation as has happened in the other countries?
Well, you can write it into your legislation. And incidentally, what happened in Canada is grossly overstated because Parliament didn't implement the law as required by the unanimous Supreme Court decision. It wasn't an expansion of the law because of they'd had the law for a few years. It was because the law as originally introduced didn't reflect what the Supreme Court said it should do. So it's often misstated as an example of expanding the law, which it wasn't.
Okay, Julian, thanks for that call. Thanks for your questions today. I just want to go to Baroness Finlay, if I may.
Yes.
You're obviously a professor in palliative care, but is there a sliding scale? Is there a continuum that goes to palliative sedation in the end?
Can I answer that? And then I do want to say something about the suicide prevention strategies as well. In terms of palliative sedation, as it's used in some countries, where it's been used actually as a way of avoiding having to go through all the checks and balances related to their processes in law over giving euthanasia usually. It's quite different. In the United Kingdom and in palliative medicine, if somebody is distressed and they need to be sedated for a time, we very carefully titrate and monitor that. And in fact, quite often what you find is that if somebody's had a really good rest and has been sedated for a day or two, that actually their symptoms then come really well under control. You can lower the dose and they can wake up again. You mustn't underestimate how exhausted people can be if they've been ill for a time and they haven't had all of the input that they ought to have. So palliative sedation isn't used as a backdoor route. It's very, very rarely used, extremely rarely used, and when it is used, it's very careful. It's with patient consent, and it's to provide, if you like, a break, a time where the patient can really totally rest and then reassess all aspects of their symptom control and their distress. And you have to remember that distress is often multifactorial. This isn't just about dealing with one physical problem, it's dealing with a lot of problems that the person's facing. Could I just say something about suicide?
Okay.
Because I know that on the Isle of Man you've got a very active suicide prevention strategy. What's being proposed here is you'll say, well, our law over suicide prevention stays in place, but we'll cut a hole in it and we'll say for some people we'll prevent your suicide, but for others, against very arbitrary criteria, which are really just an opinion and can't be accurately verified, we will facilitate you having lethal drugs for your own suicide. And that just doesn't seem to have consistency within it. You've been doing well, as far as I understand, in bringing down the suicide rate, because you did have it quite high. But actually, when you look at countries that have gone down this road, their suicide rates haven't fallen as much as in countries where they have had good suicide prevention but don't have legalised euthanasia and assisted suicide. And so it would suggest, although it's very difficult to extrapolate one from the other, that there may be a correlation between actually suicides, violent suicides, other types out in the community, and having passed assisted suicide and euthanasia legislation.
Okay, Trevor Moore?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. First of all, just going back to the treatment, what Baroness Finlay seems to be saying is that it's okay for a health practitioner to withdraw life-sustaining equipment, but not to issue a prescription which would help the person to end their own life as a matter of their own choice. I've heard that described as, it's functionally equivalent to be withdrawing the equipment, and many learned law judges have said the same thing. On suicide, if I may say so, having dealt with many families in the aftermath of suicide, it's actually quite. I was going to use the word specious, so I will, to compare suicide in the community in general with assisted suicide under the various regimes that exist around the world. Suicide in the general community is often isolated, gruesome. The grieving for the families is absolutely appalling. Assisted suicide under the legislation is usually in a calm place, surrounded by those who love you and you love them. I was a friend in Canada who attended an assisted death. There were 14 people present with the dog lying on the bed. So the idea that you suggest that suicide counselling is the same for people who want an assisted death. I mean, some of the respondents to the Dr. Allinson's consultation were very moving. And one multiple sclerosis sufferer said, "This is not life, this is prison." And that's their decision, not palliative care or any other health practitioner's decision. And if they've taken that decision, we have to respect that autonomy, just as I can refuse life-sustaining treatment. I can do voluntary stopping eating and drinking, which is a gruesome death, and I'm aware of it through contacts. We shouldn't be forcing people to suffer in that way when it could so easily be helped.
Okay, we're with Baroness Finlay, a crossbench peer from the House of Lords, and Trevor Moore, whose website is called My Death, My Decision. And lots more to talk about. I've got lots of calls and also lots of messages to get through between now and 1. This is proposed legislation for the Isle of Man. An assisted dying bill is going through stages at the moment. Dr. Allinson, MHK, himself, of course, a GP, has proposed this bill, and this will affect the Isle of Man. So if you have something to say, by all means, do get in touch.
Plum Master, where plumbers shop. For supplies, we've got the lot. Ramsey Douglas, come on down. Plum Master, the best around. Gas boilers, pipes and taps. Bathroom fittings, stylish rads. Plum Master have all in store and deliver to your door.
For trade and DIY plumbing supplies, visit Plum Master at Haldane Fisher in Douglas and Ramsey. Plum Master, your local, reliable, competitive plumbing supplier.
If you're an excellent team player with the ability to work with paid and volunteer staff and love to be hands-on, St John Ambulance is recruiting for a commercial training manager. The successful candidate will work closely with the customer, St John trainers and students, and will plan the training calendar, manage trainer allocation and deliver courses when required. If you have a recognised trainer and assessor qualification and would like more information, including a full job description, then email ceo@sja.org.im.
At ShopRite, a big slice of our range is continually priced to match or better other supermarkets. We call it Price Match Plus, the plus being what others simply don't match. Like ShopRite Savers, low prices, choice and value you won't get elsewhere, with brands like Sainsbury's and no need to travel miles. Plus, the difference being locally owned makes. We're loyal supporters of local food producers and businesses and benefit the Manx economy directly. ShopRite, proudly locally owned.
The only thing worse than the agony of toothache is the agony of waiting days to get it treated. Not anymore. Tracy Bell in Douglas and Castletown offers same-day or next-day emergency appointments from £95, whether you're registered with us or not. Toothache, broken teeth, fractured dentures, 7 days a week, Tracy Bell's dentist can help you. For emergency appointments, call 613323 or 494 327 out of hours, and we'll take the pain away. The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
And with Baroness Finlay and Trevor Moore talking about the proposed assisted dying legislation on the Isle of Man. If you'll just bear with me, Laura Finlay and Trevor Moore, here's a message in from Patrick from Onken, who said, Andy, over the past few months there seems to have been a majority of callers opposing the right to assisted dying. Their arguments range from religious beliefs to exaggerated accounts of how this is carried out in other countries. I've been diagnosed with motor neurone disease, degenerative and incurable. Every week I'm getting worse. I know I'm getting worse. Weaker, unable to walk, difficulty breathing. I'm 76 and I can come to terms with the fact that I'm dying. But what terrifies me is that I may have to suffer. More than the pain, it's the indignity, the humiliation of having to have people tending to my needs, bathing, toileting. Can anybody explain to me what's the point of prolonging my misery until my inevitable end? These are Patrick's words. It would be a great comfort to know that when things become unbearable, there is a way out. Baroness Finlay.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Patrick, for phoning in and describing your fears. You're terrified of the future from what you're saying. Nobody wants to prolong misery. But I think across our society, and certainly with your services on the Isle of Man, people want to do all to enhance your dignity, look after you as you feel that you need, meet your needs. You talk about needing personal care. Let's not beat around the bush. Thousands of people over the age of 65 are incontinent to some extent or another. It doesn't make them less of a person. Thousands of people need help with different aspects of personal care. And actually, if I can quote from someone in my own family who said that she was surprised that there was actually a joy in receiving care because she realised that people were wanting to look after her. We've got lots of young people in our society who are really good at looking after each other. This isn't about saying someone has a disability and that's awful. It's actually that people do want to be involved. They want to support people. They want to support activities to do research into conditions like motor neurone disease. And that there is a whole lot of energy around trying to provide good care. Simply providing lethal drugs is not the answer.
Trevor Moore?
Gosh, yeah, well, the word they was used rather a lot there. They want to do this. Well, what about the person? Patrick referred to the word comfort, I think. And what's been found in many jurisdictions is that once people know that the possibility of an assisted death is available, it actually helps them to come to terms psychologically with the fact that their life is coming to an end. And in fact, somewhere around 30% of people it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but roughly a third who are approved for an assisted death don't actually proceed with it, which I think shows the point I'm just making. But motor neurone disease and other neurodegenerative diseases would not be covered by the proposed bill. And it's interesting to see that in some jurisdictions like New South Wales and New Zealand, I think it is, certainly Tasmania, they've actually got a different time period for neurodegenerative conditions. I think it's 12 months in New South Wales. As to terminal illness, just to pick up on a point Baroness Finlay mentioned earlier about not being defined, terminal illness would obviously have to be determined by the appropriate health professionals, but this is done in so many other contexts, not least, for example, for extended special social benefits. So it's already there. It's not a difficult issue to establish.
Okay, Val, you're live on Mannin Line. Hi, Val.
Hi there. Right, I'm very much in favour of the assisted dying. I was a nurse. I worked, in various places, but predominantly at Nobles, and I was on the bank for the hospice for 14 years. So I've seen lots of people die, and sometimes, some of the patients have actually said, "Please, nurse, can you give me something? I just can't stand it." A lot of it was sometimes it was the pain or the sickness, and also for a lot the fear of dying. They didn't know what it was going to be like. Obviously, I didn't do that. However, if it was myself, I must admit I would choose to take something and die. If where there's absolutely no hope, no quality of life whatsoever, then I feel that I probably would, because I can't. It's not that I say I can't see the point of living, but for me personally, I wouldn't want to be here if there is no quality of life. Some people can
Val, how would you define no hope, or how would you define quality of life?
Right. Well, the no hope is that there's no way you're going to improve. It's a chronic condition that you are going to be your life is going to end soon. And the low quality of life, when I couldn't do anything for myself, if I couldn't, feed myself, okay, fair enough. I heard the Baroness saying it. Incontinence isn't a problem really, but just doing anything where there was no pleasure. And for me, that's how I would feel it would be.
Okay.
Now,
sorry, go on.
Can I just add something else too?
Yeah,
I just add something?
Yeah, by all means.
A friend in Canada, she did the assisted dying. Well, she wasn't really a friend. She was a friend of her ex-husband, or I knew her that way, and I knew the daughter. And she chose to do it. And she did it on her own, in the establishment where she was given the medication. And she didn't want a family with her at the time. She just wanted to spare them. And she took it, and she'd put everything in order, said all her goodbyes, and she did it on her terms. And it seemed to, I wouldn't say well received by the daughter, but, the daughter accepted and could see why she chose to do that.
And can you reconcile that in your head, Val?
Yes, I can. Yes, definitely.
Okay, I appreciate your call today. Thanks for that. Back with Baroness Finlay. This cuts across boundaries of law, religion, and, if you like, morality, Baroness Finlay. Well, I mean, if this is the new future, and it is in many legislations, it is in many areas and jurisdictions across the world, what's to stop it now?
Well, first of all, can I just quote from someone who I think was your poet, actually, your bard, who said the rights of the strong must not compromise the protection of the weak. And I think that's really important. If you're going to change the law, you have to say, what are the unintended consequences of doing it? Val has pointed out fear of dying, fear what lies ahead. That is fear of a future that we don't know. And indeed, I've had patients, hundreds of patients, when you explore with them what they're frightened of. Very often they're frightened of things that just won't happen. I'm able to say, I really don't think that's going to happen to you. Yes, patients want to have conversations about how they are going to die, how they're going to die of their disease gently and naturally. Nobody should think that being given lethal drugs is always straightforward. In Oregon, the official data shows that the length of time to death for half of the people is between half an hour and 104 hours. That's not quiet and quick. For the other half, yes, it's much quicker. 9 people woke up again. When you look at the drugs that are given for euthanasia, one of them is a paralyzing agent. The person's totally paralyzed, can't move a muscle. They actually die of asphyxia. No drug regulatory authority anywhere in the world has approved and researched into the way that these massive overdoses of drugs actually work to end life. We don't know whether people regain consciousness when they're totally paralyzed, even to a tiny extent. We just don't know. But the other problem is, if you're going to take doctors away from providing care of patients to do this, you're going to diminish your clinical services. And we know that from Canada, there are doctors who are leaving palliative medicine because of the way that things have gone.
Okay, Trevor Moore, the law, religion and morals.
Absolutely, yes. Could I just pick up on something that Val said? In the jurisdictions that have an assisted death where annual reports are now produced, the reasons why people want an assisted death are less to do with symptom management and more to do with things like loss of autonomy and the inability to do things that you used to like doing. As I said, someone on the consultation said, this isn't life, this is a prison. And I think that's very much for the individual to decide. Yes, I'd absolutely agree. The best support available should be provided or at least offered. But then it's down to the individual to decide. And that is very much a subjective thing. And people may disagree with it. Like Val was saying, the daughter wasn't particularly happy in the case she knew. But that was down to what the mother wanted. But as to the drugs, I'm sorry, but this is just alarmism. Actually, what My Death, My Decision would campaign for is the option of either self-administration or injection by a health practitioner, as is allowed in New Zealand and in Canada. But let's suppose you've been suffering from motor neurone disease for 12 years. Would you really think that the prospect, which is purely hypothetical from what the Baroness is saying, because no one can ask the person, but you might have to, it might take half an hour for the drugs to work. I'm sorry, but half an hour is a nice trade-off for 12 years. But that's purely hypothetical. I'm not saying that is even provable.
And in terms of religion, where does My Death, My Decision stand?
Very much have religious people who support us on our board. One of our patrons is Canon Rosie Harper, who former member of the General Synod, who says, as far as she's concerned, there's no theological reason why we shouldn't have an assisted dying law. There are actually very few opponents who will say that religion is the reason that they oppose, and they do turn to issues like saying that they think that people will be coerced. But there is actually no evidence in jurisdictions like Switzerland, Oregon. Switzerland's had their law, by the way, for about 80 years. Oregon's had theirs since 1997, and increasingly jurisdictions are showing that this isn't. This is again, it's hypothetical versus the reality of suffering, and I really do think that people have to respect that what people want is their own choice, and religious folk or otherwise.
Okay. Chop, you're live on Mannin Line today. Hi, Chop.
Awesome, Andy, how are you?
Good, thanks. What's your opinion?
I'm all for it, and just listening to Trevor there, I 100% agree with what he's saying. However, Baroness Finlay, I think what she said is absolute tripe. My grandfather has lived with MS for the last 5 years. Now, in the last 5 years, I've watched him go from quite a strong independent and proud man to a man who's now laying in a bed, who's paralysed from the neck down and can't do anything for himself. I'm actually good friends with Alex Allinson, and I've met him a few times over a pint, and I've said to him, just because he's medically qualified, and not just him, doctors all over the world, just because they're medically qualified and spent enough time at university, what gives them that decision to keep that person alive? Now, if I had a dog who was paralysed from the neck down, I'd be hung, drawn and quartered for animal cruelty. So why is it all right for me to keep my grandfather in a nursing home on the Isle of Man, suffering the way that he is, but if I was to keep an animal in that condition, I'd be prosecuted.
Well, probably, I mean, people would say, Chop, because your grandfather is a human being, and the dog is an animal, so that's the difference, surely.
Well, just because he's a human being and a dog, doesn't matter what you are, Andy, nobody wants to be paralysed from the neck down. Nobody wakes up and thinks, yeah, I'd like to spend the rest of my life paralysed from the neck down. Nobody wants that. He's in his 80s now, and he has openly said that he doesn't want to be alive anymore. Who does? Who would want to live in that condition? Now, it's unfair on him, and it's unfair on us as a family to keep him in that condition. Now, I don't care what letters you have after your name. No one is qualified to determine that a person should stay alive. If that person is living in that condition, and listening to Baroness Finlay earlier on, going on about sedation and everything else, no matter how much you sedate him, and probably not just him, there's probably millions of people around the world that are in similar conditions. Nobody should have to live their life if they don't want to, just because a doctor or a medical professional with letters after their name has said they can't take their own life. And what Baroness Finlay has said today is absolute tripe. It really is.
But okay, well, let's put that aside. But also, what would you say about anybody with a religious view would say that life is sacred, Chop?
Well, I think that's their own opinion. If people want to look at a religious, put your religion glasses on. If people want to live like that, let them. It's all about free choice. But if people want to, if whatever religion you are, and life is sacred, and that's what they want, let them crack on. But my grandfather doesn't want to live like that. He really doesn't, and he's 83 years old. He does not want to wake up every morning and to have nurses come in and effectively look after him like he's a baby. Nobody wants, and if that's his decision that he doesn't want to live like that, then I think that should be respected. All right,
Chop, thank you, and send our best wishes to your grandfather.
I will. Cheers, mate.
17 minutes to 1. Becky?
Hi, it's Becky, trainer and a health professional. I recently attended the presentation by Claude Reynard on the Isle of Man, and I was very concerned by the extent of the law in Canada and how far it has been extended. And it even now includes the diagnosis outside of end of life, and which also includes mental health illnesses, and also recently some articles about people who can't even afford care are being offered. I'm interested in the thoughts and what you think on the legislation in Canada and its journey that it has taken from first being passed in 2016. Thank you.
Mannin Line on Manx Radio. We're talking about the proposed assisted dying legislation being brought forward by Dr. Alex Allinson, MHK, with Trevor Moore of My Death, My Decision and Baroness Finlay, a crossbench peer, talking about this. Please get in touch if there's something you want to add.
We all like to live in the moment. Impromptu drinks, long evenings down Kirkmichael, family barbecues.
Who fancies a dip?
Me! We like to keep our options open, but the trick to keeping your options open is actually a bit of forward planning too. Why not make a plan with your very own HSBC Relationship Manager? Talk to us about financial planning. HSBC, opening up a world of opportunity.
Investment involves risk. The amount initially invested may not be received back. HSBC Bank PLC Isle of Man branch is regulated by the Isle of Man Financial Services Authority. Visit the HSBC website for terms and eligibility requirements.
Step into Office World, the island's largest fully stocked stationery store, where there's over 5,000 items on display to take away. From pens, paper, inks and toners to general stationery, adhesives and batteries. You can get what you need right now from Office World, with all the big brands, including Pilot, Pentel, Sellotape, Duracell, Gorilla, Pucker Pads and more. Office World is conveniently located on Spring Valley Industrial Estate, with easy parking right outside the door.
Office World! It's the Manx Telecom Parish Walk this Saturday. Whether you're walking, watching or driving, remember the roads will be extra busy, so take extra care. For details of road closures and to follow your friends and family, visit parishwalk.com.
This July, it's time to go the full Monty. The funniest, most revealing musical of all time. The classic tale of downtrodden steelworkers letting it all hang out comes to the Gaiety Theatre. It's full of humour. It's full of heart. It's full of, well, the full Monty, 15th to the 22nd July. villagaiety.com or 600 Travel 5. Sponsored by Zedra and supported by your nation station, Manx Radio.
The Mannin Line. Daily interaction, debate and exchange of ideas. Broadcast on Manx Radio.
It's 13 minutes before 1 with Trevor Moore. And Baroness Finlay, what did you think of what you heard?
Well, I think Becky's made a very important point about actually the change in attitude and care. Absolutely correct that there are now horror stories coming out of Canada as people can't even get the care that they need to live well in the community, and yet they're being offered lethal drugs. So it becomes a financial pressure on people, a financial expedient. And I think it's important to remember that no doctor can predict how long someone's going to live. There are diagnostic errors, and you have to decide, are you going to put your efforts into providing support for people, or are you going to abandon that and switch over and say, well, we'll give people lethal drugs, rather than working to improve their quality of life, find what they need, help them live well and support them. And I would also just say about the patient with MS in particular, everybody should be having a discussion with their family now to say what they want, what they would like, how they would like to be cared for, what matters to them. And every healthcare professional should be asking patients, what matters to you, and making sure that patients get that, rather than reinforcing their fears, reinforcing despair. But changing the law is too dangerous.
Okay, briefly, if you would, you're obviously in South Wales at the moment. Yes. Is anything coming before the Senedd in Wales?
Not at the moment that I'm aware of. I haven't seen anything, but I have seen a draft of the bill that's being put forward. I think it's now published in the Isle of Man, and that is extremely worrying, because there you're just saying to doctors, there's not even a stipulation about them having been qualified for any significant length of time and having a great deal of clinical experience. You need 3 people to sign off a cremation, but you're only going to need 2 doctors to sign off somebody being given lethal drugs. It just does not seem to add up or be safe for the care of people in society. And the last thing I would have to say is I'm afraid over many years I've seen families that people thought were loving families, and they turn out not to be.
Okay.
It has been said, where there's a will, there's a way. And there are pressures on people, particularly financial pressures in today's climate. And to change the law to allow some of those pressures to go on behind closed doors undetected is really dangerous.
Okay. Trevor Moore?
Yeah, just to pick up on Canada, the way the law evolved over there, I touched on this earlier, it was because the Parliament there did not follow what the unanimous Supreme Court judgment said in the Carter case. So 2 very brave people, Nicole Gladue and Jean Truchon, took a case to court to say, hang on a minute, I'm not terminally ill, but I think in John's case he had lost all use of 4 of his limbs. He had cerebral palsy and it had declined over time. He wasn't technically terminally ill. So he took a case to court to say, hang on, Parliament, you've got this wrong. And Parliament decided not to challenge the case that he won. And that's why the law was changed in Canada. The lady wrongly said that mental illness is included in Canada. They've deferred it because they've rightly realised that it needs more consideration. But as I said earlier, no one's campaigning in the UK for a law that extends to mental illness. I think this comes back to ending unnecessary suffering and the autonomy of the individual. It should be my choice. Yes, all the support possible should be given or offered to people, but if at the end of it, like your caller was just saying about his grandfather, if that was his decision, that is his decision, and it's not for anyone to second judge that. So I think it's really important that the time has come for, obviously I'm from England, but we have a group in the Isle of Man who are campaigning for the law to be introduced there. Okay. Colin, you're live on Mannin Line. Hi, Colin.
Oh, hello there. Right, I've listened to everything going on. Right, my wife had cancer and she was at home with me, and a nurse came along and decided that, there's not much life left really for her, and just said to me, I'm putting a morphine tap on her. And I knew then they're going to kill her. So what's the difference between that and that poor gentleman who's 83 or something, can't do anything? They could put a morphine tap into him and he just goes slowly into sleep, and that's the end of it. So no doctor came round to decide whether to put a morphine tap on my wife.
When was this?
And the next day she was dead.
When was this, Colin?
2021.
All right, okay. Thank you for reporting that. And let's go to Betty with us now. Hi, Betty.
Hi. I'd just like to say that I have a daughter who's a psychologist who lives in British Columbia, and Canada, and she hasn't found problems like your lady has said. I just can't think of her name right now. The Baroness. She hasn't found problems like that at all. And everything seems to be going quite smoothly.
Would you support an assisted dying law on the Isle of Man, Betty?
Definitely, yes. I think it should be there for people who want it. Those people who don't want it don't have to have it. And I do appreciate that there might be some other people who are persuaded that they need it, but things like that happen all in life all the time, and we have to think about the majority, really. And I do feel that the majority on the island probably do want assisted dying.
Okay, all right, Betty, thank you for that. Baroness Finlay is with us, crossbench peer from the UK House of Lords. You're firmly, staunchly, I would say, against assisted dying. In fact, I think you call it assisted suicide.
Yes, I did. And euthanasia. Well, I think you have to be clear what you're doing. Sue means self and CDA means killing, and that is what you're doing when you take lethal drugs to shorten your life. Can I just make a comment too? Morphine it's a worrying story. I can't comment on the conversation that went on, but actually these drugs given to people to end their life, that's not morphine. It's massive overdoses of other drugs. We use morphine very widely in end-of-life care, and that doesn't kill patients. And I think it's really important, if you've got listeners.
Is the proposed legislation, is it a one-way street, Baroness Finlay? If this is introduced in the Isle of Man, would there be any going back from the legislation?
Well, all the evidence from around the world is that there is no going back from it. It is a one-way street. You'd have to reverse the legislation if you felt that you wanted to. I think it's very important that conversations are monitored and recorded if you did go down this route. And you could look at the Swiss model, which is outside clinical care, if that's the route that you decide you want to go down. But I would really caution people about going down the route particularly that Canada's gone down with their legislation. And if I can just say one thing about Oregon, federal law in the US has been one of the things that has held a cap on Oregon's extension of its legislation. And in the legislation, it doesn't allow for euthanasia, but actually... And they do have reporting mechanisms in Oregon, and there are reporting mechanisms, but some of the jurisdictions that have gone down this road don't even have very rigorous reporting mechanisms.
Okay, Trevor Moore, what's your sense of the opinion on the Isle of Man through the organisation you have here?
Well, I think it reflects what happened in the Island Global Research poll a couple of years ago, which came out at 65%. As Dr. Allinson said, the consultation that he did was it was not a poll. But I do think that it's time that we let people have their own choice. The idea that it's a one-way street. Well, once a law is introduced, maybe the citizens decide that that's what they want to keep. It's a democratic process, and for the law to be extended would require the politicians to extend it. That's called democracy and government. And so if on the Isle of Man you introduce a bill in one sphere, down the line, who knows, someone might want to retract it, some might want to extend it, but ultimately it's down to the people. I mean, opinion polls in the countries that have assisted dying uniformly show a high public support, and if it was so egregious, I would have thought by now there'd be a clamour to repeal the laws. Okay, Trevor Moore, thanks for being with us today. We appreciate it. The website is called, what is it again? My Death, My Decision. Okay, and Baroness Finlay, thanks for being with us from Cardiff. Thanks for your opinion today.
Thank you.
Okay, Mannin Line today has been talking about the proposed assisted dying legislation brought forward by Dr. Allinson. Thanks for your opinion. You can get in touch. Text, email, call and WhatsApp.
WILD